Here is the very basic and very important question about Angular forms. What are Angular forms? What are the types of Angular forms? We know that forms are a very important part of any web application. For example, login form, registration form, feedback form, etc. All these are forms only in which user can submit the information. So the definition is Angular forms are used to handle users' input. Now suppose we have this login form. Then the process of data flow in Angular will be the user will input the data here in the HTML template file. Then that data will be bind in the component TypeScript file. Then it will be sent to the Angular service, which will then finally send it to the server, which will receive the data and process the data further. In most cases, this server will be an API only. Why we are using class here? To write some business logic or validation on this data. And why we need Angular service here? Because it will give your application a proper structure. And the common logic can be used in many classes which can be written here in the service, which is good for reusability. In short, this is the basic flow which is recommended for data flow in Angular forms. This is the process now. Now the question is, how many types of Angular forms we have in Angular? So we have two types of forms. One is template driven form and another is reactive form. As their name suggests, in template driven forms, most of the code will be written and handled in the HTML templates only. And in reactive forms, most of the code will be written in component TypeScript class file. We will see all the differences between this reactive form and HTML template forms in the upcoming question. This is the answer of this question. If you have any queries, please write in the comment section. Here is the question. What is the difference between template driven forms and reactive forms? From interview point of view, this is a very important question. First, we will see the differences here. Then the implementation of both the forms will show you in upcoming questions. So let's start with the differences. The first difference is if we select template driven forms for our application, then most code and validation logic will be written in HTML template file. And if we select reactive forms to create the forms in our application, then most code and validation logic will be written in component TypeScript class file. Second difference is we have to add forms module in app module file to activate template driven forms. In other case, we have to add a reactive forms module in app module to activate reactive forms. Now the most important thing, when to use template driven forms and when to use reactive forms. Answer is simple. Template driven forms are used when application is simple and have less controls, whereas reactive forms are used when application is complex and the page have many controls. So these are the differences. Now we will implement both of these forms in upcoming questions. Here is the practical question. How to set up template driven forms. Let's go to the code. Here I have created a new project in Angular and here I have deleted all the code from the app.component.html file and then I simply pasted this simple HTML code here. Now you can see a simple HTML code here with inside the form we have these two input fields, email and password, and then this button with text login. Nothing special about it. Remember, this property name is like the ID of this field, so it has to be unique for every field. Now we have to implement template driven forms in this form. For that, first thing is to use template reference variable and assign it the value ng form like this. This template reference variable is like the name of this form. Now this ng form is showing error, alright, because Template-driven forms need forms module to be imported in app module file. So let's go to the app module and add forms module here like this. Then let's go back, and now the next step is when user will click this login button, then this email and password should go to the component file for further processing, right? For that, we will use event binding concept. We will use the ng submit event and then we will call the login method like this. Here inside the login method, we will pass the data of this login form. This login form dot value will carry all the data of this login form. It is showing error now because in event binding this method should be there in the TypeScript file. But it is not yet created in the component TypeScript file, that's why it is giving error. So let's go there and create the method. Before we also have to bind these fields to the event. For that, type ng model with both these fields. If we will not type this ng model here, if we will not put it here, then these fields will not be bind and it will not work as expected. Now go to the TypeScript file and here we will create this method in the TypeScript like this. Here the same login method is receiving the form data value from HTML template file and then print the data. Okay, now all done. So let's run the application with ngserve command and my application is already running. So go to the browser. Here I will open the console first. Now I will enter some text in email and password and then press enter. See the TypeScript file we have received the data. Here in the console it is printing, that means the TypeScript file has received the data from the HTML template file. So this is the way we can use template driven forms. You can structure your application in a better way by passing this data to services, and I have covered the services in other question. I will not cover it here because then it will be a very big topic. So this is the basic of template driven forms. You have to configure most of the code you have to do in your HTML template file only. This is the answer of this question. If you have any queries, then please ask me in the comment section. Here is a short and simple question on template driven forms. How to apply required field validation in template driven forms. There can be many types of validations for forms inputs. For example, required field validation. In that case, login or form submission will not work if the username is empty. Then input length validation. In that case, this password length should be at least of 8 characters, otherwise it will not work. Then we can have email validation, means username should be of email pattern only. So there can be many kind of validation, but the required field validation is the most common one. So this can be asked in the interviews also. Now let me show you in code what we need to do to implement required field validation. This is the code we have seen in the template driven forms. Here we have this email and password fields. Now to implement required field validation, the first step is to just put this required keyword here for the email field. Then let's go to the browser and here you can see in the console that your form is now ng invalid. That means the form is invalid because email is required and it is blank right now. And if I put something in email now, then it become valid. Alright, this is the first step. Now how to stop submitting the form if the form is invalid? Because if I will press login here, then in the console the data will go. See the data in the console here, meaning our data is going to the component TypeScript file. Now to stop for processing the data, let's go back to the code. Here in the button, just use this disabled property and set it true. True if the login form is invalid, and that's it. Now the button will be disabled true if the form is invalid. Now go back to the browser again, and here the button will be disabled. You can see the button is disabled if there is nothing in the email field. So data cannot be processed to TypeScript component file. And when you put some data here in the field, then this button will be automatically enabled. This is one way to implement required field validation in template driven forms. There are other ways also, but required keyword is important. That has to be implemented. Now, as I said, in template driven forms, most of the code and validation is done at the template side only, right? You remember? And this is the example for that. We have only manipulated the template file, not the component TypeScript file. So this is the answer of this question, and if you have any queries, then please let me know in the comment section. Here is the question. What is form group and form control in Angular? Before understanding reactive forms, first we should know what is a form group and a form control. Let's take a simple example of this login form. Suppose we want to handle this login form with reactive forms approach. For that, we have two important things. One is form control. Form controls are the individual elements or controls. Here, username is a form control and password is another form control. Second thing is form group. Form group is nothing but it is a collection of all the form controls in the form. Now the question is, what is the role of these form group and form control? The answer is simple. Both are used to track the values of states of controls. Now let me explain this more. See, both form group and form control are inherited from abstract control class. And this abstract control class has these properties: value, error, valid, invalid, dirty, pristine, touched, untouched. No need to memorize them, but yes, these are the properties. Now these properties will help in tracking the changes in each and every control. For example, value property will be the value in the password field. Then if we want to make this username required or mandatory, then we can set that if the username is left blank, then this form will be invalid. So this is valid, invalid is another property. Similarly, all these properties have some roles in these controls. Now form control and form group will get all these properties via inheritance from the base class abstract control, and they will help in tracking the changes in individual control. Based on that we can set the form valid, invalid, touched, untouched. So these kind of information we can get in the code. Alright, I will show you now this in the code. See, here we have this form group class. I will explain the remaining code later. So here just right click on this form group class and go to definition. See, form group is inherited from abstract control class. Now again right click on abstract control and go to definition again. Here if we go down, down and down, then we can see the properties here which we were discussing. Valid, invalid, and all other newly added properties are also here. So some properties are newly added, so they are also here. Now if I want to see the form group and form control trackers in the browser, there also I can show you. So let's go to the browser. As our application is already running, so that's why it's running mode right now. Here we can see the console. Now I will enter some value in the username and password, and then I will press login. Now see in the console, here we have our form group. If I expand this, then you can see the value here. So just scroll down and the properties here you can see like this. Here you can see valid, invalid, enabled, disabled, all the properties. And in the prototype, you can see the abstract control class from where form group class is inherited. Similarly, if you want to see the properties of the form controls, then go up and expand this controls property, because all the controls will be inside the form group only. Then expand this username and again scroll down to see the same properties for the individual username form control. So this is the whole story about the form group and form control. Both form group and form control will help you to handle these properties, and these properties are tracking the change in each and every control. And that's why what is the role of the form group and form control in reactive forms. Now understanding reactive forms will be very easy for you, and that I will cover in upcoming question. If you have any queries about this question, then please ask me in the comment section. First is, in reactive forms, most code and validation logic is written in component TypeScript class file. Second point is, reactive forms can be activated by adding reactive forms module in app module. And the last is, reactive forms are used when application is complex and have more controls. This is the theory. Now let's see how to set up reactive forms. We will implement our simple basic login form only with the help of reactive form approach. Now let's go to the code. Here we have this basic HTML form for our HTML template file. Just two input fields, username and password, and a button login. That's it, pure HTML. Now for reactive forms, we have to write most of the code in the app component file, right? So let's go to the TypeScript class file. Here first create the instance of form group like this. Now I already covered the form group and form control in my previous question. So it's my recommendation to visit that question for a deep understanding of form group and form control. Now as we know, we can have multiple form controls inside a form group, right? So we will create two form controls instance of username and password inside the form group like this. Now to match these names with our HTML templates, so this username and password name should be matched. So let's go to the template file, and here first we will create this form group property with the same name, login form, which we have kept the name in the component file. And then set form control name property of each control with the name given in the component file, which is username and password. This form group is showing error because we missed very important point, and that is add reactive forms module in app module. So let's go there in the app module and add it like this reactive forms module in the app module. This is mandatory for reactive forms, otherwise form group and form control will not work as expected. Okay, now in template file our fields are ready, but also we have to send data to the component file, right? The username and the password which we will enter here, and when we will click this login button, then the data should go to the component file. That is the approach, that is the thing we have to achieve. For that we will use the event binding, and here is the ng submit event with this submit login method. So if we will click login, then this method will be called. It is giving error because we have to place this method in the component file. So let's go to the component file and just create the method submit login here. This method is returning nothing but just printing all the values of the login forms. And right now we have username and password values in the login form, so it will print these values. Now let's go to the browser and see what we have. Here in the browser the console is already open. Now enter the username, suppose it is happy, and the password I will not share, it is very much secured, and then press this login. and here you can see the value of the printed from which we get from the in the TypeScript file after the printing. So this is the way we can use reactive forms. As I said earlier, for small forms, you will not see the difference between the template driven forms and the reactive forms. They will look like same, like you can choose anyone. But when your application will grow, when it will become large, then if I will go back to the code and if I will go to this HTML template file, then it should be less, because it's only the view, right? It's only the HTML and it should be less. So, and if it is less, the code will be less here, then it will look clean and better. So that's why for big application, we better to choose this reactive forms approach. Also, you can structure your application in a better way by passing the component data to an Angular service and then to the API. So Angular service I already covered in the previous questions. Okay, so this is how we set up reactive forms. If you have any queries, then please ask me in the comment section and I will be very happy to answer them, as my name is Happy Only. Here is a validation question on reactive forms. How to do validation in reactive forms? There are many kind of validations, but we will pick the required field validation because it is the most important, most common and the most simplest one. Also here our objective is to learn how to do validation in reactive forms, not to learn how many types of validations are there. So let's start. Here is the login form, and if user will press login without entering the username, then we will display this message on our reactive forms, username required. So let's go to the code now. Here I have the same reactive form which I have created in my previous question, where I explained how to create reactive forms. Now if you remember, in the template driven forms, we have provided the required property for validation in HTML template file. But that is not required in the reactive forms, because in reactive forms we are creating the form in the TypeScript class only. Therefore, the validation will also be done in the TypeScript class only. For that, first step, go to the TypeScript file, and here first import this validators class from the Angular forms like this. So this is very important. Then here, while creating the username, we will use this class. How? First we will pass the parameter null. This parameter is the initial or default value of the username. Right now we have this blank, so we put it null here. Then we will put this validators.required validator here. Here you can see some other validators also, but we need for now this required only. Now if I will go to the browser, and here if I will press login without entering the username, then you can see this form group in console. And here now if I will expand this, the form status is invalid. The reason is, if I scroll down the form group, then here if I will see for the valid property, and see this is the false. So this form is invalid because this form group valid property is false. And why this form group valid property is false? Because if I go up and then under the controls and the username, and if I will check, this valid property is false here for the username also. So the main point is, if we go back to the code, and here if any validation is failed inside this form group, whether this is one form control, any of the form control validation is failed, then this whole form group will be invalid and it will not be submitted. So this is the thing. Now the second thing is how to display the message to the user that okay, your username is required, so we have to display that error message, right? For that, we will create a method validate username like this. We can also use getters here, but for now we can use this method validate username. and then return all the properties of username control by using this get method like this. So now this method will return all the properties of the username control, and we will call this method from the template file to check the validity of the form. So go to the template file. Here first we will put the error message inside the span like this. Now here I will put some style also, because error message should be in red font and the size should be small. And now how to link this error message with the TypeScript username field? For that we will use this ngIf directive to validate the username like this. Here validate username method will call the TypeScript class method, like we are calling this validate username of TypeScript class, and will get all the properties of the username control, and from which we will check the this invalid property. Okay, and now this span element will be visible if this invalid condition is true, and if this invalid is true, it's right. If the invalid is true, the span element will be visible, and if it is false, means your form is valid, then this span will not be visible. So let's check this. Go back to the browser. Here press login again and see we are getting the error message here. Now enter something in username, and as soon as you will enter a single character, the form status will be valid. Okay, because we have now something in the username, so the control status will be valid, and therefore the form group will be valid, and therefore the form status will be valid. And now as per the if condition, the invalid will be false, and therefore the span will be removed from here. It will be hidden now. So that is the required field validation, and similarly we can do other many validation, but here we are only checking that how the validation is basically done. So let's go back to the TypeScript class code, and the one-liner answer for the validation is: validators class is used to implement validation in reactive forms. This is the simplest answer for answering the validation question about reactive forms in the interviews. This is the answer, and if you have any queries, then please ask me in the comment section.